Okay guys, so welcome to Year 12 PE, Stages of Learning PowerPoint. We've already gone through the classification of skills in regards to open, closed, discrete, serial, continuous, fine and gross. What we're going to be going through now are the actual different stages. So what stages do you as an athlete, as a human being go through to learn something new? Now, all the way back in 1967, there's these two guys called Fitz and Posner who presented a theory which is called the process of learning motor skills. All right, and even all the way back from 1967 to today, 50 years later, the theory continues to be referred to. Now, what the theory actually states is that everyone goes through distinct stages when learning a motor skill, specifically 3 stages of learning. As mentioned previously, there are 3 different stages. As mentioned previously, there are 3 different stages to skill learning. Stage 1 is the cognitive stage. The fundamental requirement for this stage is that the athlete is to gain an understanding of what they are required to do to perform the task or the skill at hand. That's why this is also known as the understanding stage. The second stage of skill learning is called the associative stage. This is identified by the emphasis for practice, hence the alternative name of the practice stage. The learner, having acquired an idea of what a skill actually is, needs to repeat the movements to enhance synchronization of both mind and muscles. Errors will still happen, but they're going to be smaller and less frequent than that of the cognitive stage. The final stage of skill learning is the autonomous stage. This is characterized by the learner's ability to automatically execute the skill, hence the alternate name of the automatic stage. Execution of this movement is properly sequenced and performed instinctively by the learner. As mentioned previously, the cognitive stage is where the athlete gains an understanding of what is required for them to perform the task or the skill at hand. This will necessitate knowing what to do and give the athlete an insight about how to do it. This is where conceptualization becomes very important. That's the generation of clear mental pictures of the task for the athlete. This is really good for good movement reproduction. Demonstrations, videos, and information highlighting the important points can actually help guide the learner through the skill. Coaches must be very careful to avoid information overload, however, because this can actually confuse the learner during this early stage. It is expected that the learner will encounter problems or errors, and the number and magnitude of which will depend on the difficulty of the skill. The more difficult the skill, the more errors and the bigger the errors are going to happen. The learner may experience errors or awkwardness and even some disorientation during this process. Thus, the learners actually need to receive continuous feedback or information on their progress. They need to know how they're going. If they experience much difficulty, the skill could possibly be broken down into smaller movements for practice. During the cognitive stage, learners should experience some sort of success. All positive learning should be reinforced and encouraged. Many coaches give drills at this point to improve learners' coordination and feel for the desired movement. The rate of progress through the cognitive stage varies from person to person or from athlete to athlete. This really depends on the difficulty of the skill. It could be from anything from a few minutes to a very much longer period of weeks or months. Some difficult skills may never be mastered by some people. In the previous slide, we did mention some of the implications for practice, but as a coach, you can actually help learners during the cognitive phase by 1. Giving clear instructions, not overloading the learner with information, but using short cue words. You can also help them by providing accurate demonstrations, which ensures they have a visual aid and also able to get that mental picture. Number 3, allowing time for practice by re-demonstration. Alright, so you re-demonstrating the skill to the learner enables them to get that clearer picture in their head and knowing exactly what they need to do to perform the skill. 4, allowing the learner to experience the feel of the correct movement. This is that kinesthetic sense that we've talked about, the feel for the movement. When they feel that it's right, and those cue words you're giving them, those short cue words, they're going to get that skill down and understand what the proper skill feels like once they've done it correctly. And finally, providing specific feedback to help the learner recognize and correct errors. This is very important because it has to be specific feedback, can't be general, okay? Got to be very specific in certain parts of the skill that you've taught. The next stage is the associative stage, which is concerned with the practice of the motor skill. Once the learner has understood what is required, she or he must practice in order to become familiar with the required sequencing and timing of the skill. The amount of practice needed will depend on the complexity of the activity, the player's ability, past experiences, and motivation. At this stage, learners typically refine accuracy and consistency of motor skill, reduce the number of errors they create compared to the cognitive stage. The learners will also gradually get more successful and more fluent in the skill, and they will also begin to make use of the intrinsic feedback. That is, as the players refine their skill, they make fewer and smaller errors due to their ability to recognize those errors and make necessary adjustments for improvement of the skill. They're also able to begin to pay attention to concurrent feedback. That's feedback during performance. And the associative stage of learning usually takes a long time, but some performers can stay in this stage for years depending on their level of ability, and some may never actually reach the autonomous stage. Normally, learners tend to spend more time in the associative stage than they did in the cognitive stage. However, this is not true for all learners. Now, the associative stage is a stage of rapid improvement. That means you'll definitely be able to see a constant improvement as long as the practice continues. The skilled action gets smoother, accurate, better timed, more efficient as you start to focus on those sequence and that timing of the skill itself. You begin to use more complex and detailed cues rather than those simple cues from the cognitive stage. You will actually also be able to perform and practice skill under a variety of situations, not just that one situation you've been practicing in the cognitive stage. This tends to be due to the fact that once you hit the associative stage, you'll start to practice in more competition-like settings and environments, so more game-like situations rather than just static activities. The final stage is the autonomous stage, which is characterized by the ability to automatically execute the skill. Now, execution of the movement is now properly sequenced and performed instinctively by the learner. The performer has now consolidated the many discrete skills, which we call subroutines, that comprise the action. An example of these subroutines within the skill of the tennis serve would be the grip, the ball toss, the backswing, the point of impact, the forward swing, and so on. Now, their movement has a characteristic fluency as these subroutines sequence and blend in aesthetically pleasing motions. This is what we call temporal patterning. Now, this temporal patterning looks like it's good because it's efficient, with the muscle groups working in order and producing only necessary movements at the required time. The most important feature of performers in the autonomous stage is that they're able to attend to other cues while giving little thought to how they perform skill. Practice is still important during this autonomous stage, but mostly involves stimulating the competition situation. So unless specifically practiced to improve technique, training sessions for these athletes tend to be a stage where they incorporate pressure drills. This helps the athlete adapt their skills to the real performance. Having reached the autonomous stage, the learners can actually start to concentrate on more detailed aspects of their skill or game. An example of this could be in tennis, where a player who's mastered the forehand drive should begin to start placing the ball away from the opponent. This is focusing more on ball placement rather than the forehand drive itself. As a learner who's reached the autonomous stage, it's important to repeatedly go back to the associative stage in order to maintain a skill at the autonomous stage.